We're delighted to have here at the School of Tyrannus a very special guest. He is one of the featured speakers at the Conservative Theological Society Conference in Fort Worth. And Charles Clough is the head of the meteorological team of the U.S. Army Aberdeen Proving Grounds at Baltimore, Maryland. His educational credentials are impressive. He is a graduate of MIT, has a master's from Texas Tech, and then has his theological degree, his Master of Theology from Dallas Theological Seminary. Dr. Clough, it's good to have you with us for this interview, and we appreciate your being with us. We understand that you have a number of concerns about Christianity and about and its relationship to science, because that's your field. What is your overarching philosophy about these matters?
Well, I believe that the Scriptures are ultimately the standard for man. They're the intellectual standard, and that if the Scriptures are what God says they are, they're His words, they're a revelation of His thinking, that God has a coherent thought, He has a coherent plan, history is progressing according to His plan, creation has been designed with His design, that this book then represents a launching pad, a foundation, a presupposition for every area where we can think or act.
So if we're going to understand any field, science or history or philosophy or psychology or how we do things or ecclesiology, we need to start with the Bible.
Correct.
And go from there. And we will much less likely go off the deep end if we stay within the parameters of the Scriptures.
That's correct. That's correct.
Well, you mentioned creation, and certainly a live topic today in the schools and in just the society in general is about creationism and evolution. Tell us your thinking on this great field of subject.
The debate between evolution and creation goes back to the assumptions underlying science itself. The problem today is that the argument is conducted at a very trivial level. People will throw out an evidence for evolution or an evidence for creation and not really get down into the deep fundamental issues at stake. What's at stake here is the basis of science. Science did not arise in a pagan environment. Modern science arose in a Christian environment where nature had design. And the reason for this is that if I'm thinking like a pagan, I don't have any assurance that that nature out there that I'm trying to measure, trying to understand, trying to do experiments with, I have no assurance that there's a coherence out there, that there's a rationality, that nature can even be known. The pagans they feared nature. They tried to appease the gods and goddesses of nature. But when Christianity came in Europe, and particularly the Reformation, you had men like Pascal and men who were committed Christians that were the fathers of modern math and modern science. So today in the academic world, there's a great amnesia, a forgetfulness over the origins of science. And modern creationism simply is getting back to the foundations of what science used to be.
Yes, who were some other outstanding Christian originators of the scientific field? I think of Sir Isaac Newton.
Correct.
As one, and people forget that not only did he discover gravity, but he was an avid student of the Bible and of the book of Revelation, I believe, in his latter years.
Oh yes, Newton wrote more, in fact, about the Bible than he did about mathematics.
Now that comes as a surprise, I'm sure, to
and we're not talking
a lot of people.
Our whole educational background today, and that's why the debate is being conducted at such a trivial level, is we are not taught from the original source material where science started and how it started. We have pop programs. You remember Carl Sagan with his movie Cosmos. Very impressive man, a very, very good teacher, but one who just basically recognized and promulgated a pagan view of science. And people forget that the ultimate outcome of a Carl Sagan view of the universe is that we are nothing but evolved protoplasm on a pale blue dot in a black meaningless universe. And that's where you wind up. But see, people don't like to take it to its logical conclusion. They want to go in a halfway house and make all these assertions about evolution, but then tomorrow they go out and they honor their wives, they go to funerals, and they think of man as somehow very valuable person, when that does not logically follow the evolutionary worldview.
So you're saying that true science and the science methodology really developed out of a worldview that was Christian and biblical.
Absolutely. Take the axiom of all science, which is the uniformity of nature. Now, every scientist has to proceed on the assumption of the uniformity of nature. If we didn't proceed that way, we would never write software programs for modeling. We'd never do experiments and report them in journals so somebody else could reproduce the experiment, because we have no confidence that the rules that work today are going to work tomorrow. So there's an absolute belief and trust in the uniformity of nature. The problem is that how do you show that nature is uniform? Where do you get that assumption from? You can't get it by observing it, because we only have maybe 200 years of scientific observations. So we can't get it by the scientific method. Science rests on a philosophical basis of the uniformity of nature. Now, the Bible presents the reasons and gives us a justification for the uniformity of nature. God created. He has made contracts in history, such as the Noahic covenant in Genesis 8 and 9. You have him telling us that he is constraining nature to work in certain ways. Well, now I have justification for doing science. Now I have the assurance that I have uniformity of nature. But on a scientific basis, I can't get that assumption established. I have to do a pre-scientific gathering of that axiom, and then my science can proceed. That's why historically science arose in a Christian environment and not a pagan environment.
So while there's an underlying thought about the uniformity of nature, science obviously observes, and ordinary people do too, that apparently there have been catastrophes or great seismic shifts somehow or another in the history of the Earth. And how does evolution explain these things, and how does the biblically oriented person understand?
Well, we have to understand from a biblical point of view that what holds nature together is not nature. What holds nature together is our sovereign creator. He's the one who holds nature together. That means that my belief in the uniformity of nature is ultimately a belief in the inherent coherence of the character of God. So that allows for these catastrophes to occur in nature without undoing my belief in the uniformity of nature. So when the Bible reports a catastrophic event was creation. If you had been there with a video camera and you had filmed the creation of Adam and Eve, you think about this, 5 minutes after their creation, how old would you have said, had you not been there when it happened? You walked into the scene 5 minutes later, and you had filmed the creation of Adam and Eve, and you had it on videotape, but you kept it, videotape, away from your observer. And he came in and you asked him, how old is that man and how old is that woman? He'd probably say 25, 30 years, because he is bringing into the situation the idea of what he's used to seeing. Whereas the videotape, which would be analogous to the scripture, that actually recorded history, recorded a much speeded up process of creation. And so it is that we have the global flood report. And this has been a strong, strong area of discussion over the whole science of geology, as whether geology is going to interpret the rock layers in terms of very slow, low power processes, or whether we're going to interpret geology in the rock strata, particularly sedimentary rock, as something that was deposited very rapidly. And recently, of course, we have the work at Mount St. Helens, where you have a catastrophe that was observed, was photographed, and we had obvious evidence of a very vastly more powerful and faster working process. So our belief in uniformity is secure, but the creationist allows for these periodic catastrophes without any problem. The uniformitarian, however, coming at it, to even conceive of that catastrophe is a threat to his idea of the uniformity of nature, because his uniformity is rooted in this abstract assumption that, gosh, I gotta have this uniformity there or I can't build my science. Well, that's true, but the uniformity that he's talking about is something that man has created, man has inferred, whereas the uniformity of nature that we talk about is what God has given to us and has revealed to us.
Well, that certainly is a lot of food for thought in the whole idea of creationism, and it really does have a solid scientific basis as well as biblical basis. Another area that you've done a lot of study in, and of course you're very much involved in your work as well as in your study, is environmentalism. And it seems like the scientists, or so-called scientists, are trying to have more and more impact on our lives because of their philosophy, and they're imposing all kinds of requirements and so forth on us. How does that all fit into the biblical framework of understanding things?
Well, again, we go back to the framework of Scripture. What is the controlling document? What is the controlling area of revelation? Well, it's the Noahic covenant. The Noahic covenant constrains the environmental structures so that we know there's certain things that will take place, certain things are never going to take place. There's never going to be a global flood. Well, to promise there's never going to be a global flood implies that God is controlling the geophysics in such a way that this can't take place. So we have a basic stability. Now what's happening today is that we are experiencing warming. My area of environmentalism, of course, would be my interest in global warming. And so in global warming, there's this observed trend toward warming. The question is it caused by man as some sort of a recent phenomena, or is it part of an age-long cycle that's gone on? And we know that from history that we've had warmings in the past, we've had coolings in the past. It's all part of that regime, that rhythm of cyclic changes under the Noahic covenant constraints.
Well, what about such things as the global warming developments and the imposition of laws and so forth, and the Kyoto conference and things of this nature? Are those things valid or real, or how should we respond to those things?
Well, the Kyoto thing is actually a very politicized version of science. Science has been prostituted recently by politicization. Politics have come in so thick that there's competition to get money and grants to do research. And the easiest way to do grants and research is to have a problem that I can solve. Mm-hmm. So there's that tendency. And there's a tendency toward global world government. And I believe that that's part of the agenda going on here, is that you get everybody excited in the world about a global problem, and the solution is going to be some abstract version of bringing back Nimrod's solution.
All right. Well, you certainly have piqued our interest in all of these scientific and biblical issues, and we certainly appreciate your being with us, Charles Clough, and sharing them with us in this interview. Thank you so much.